Hey guys, this is Levi with Berkshire Bike and Board, and today we're going to talk about how to replace the disc brake pads on your hydraulic road or mountain bike. Brake pads are a wear item. As we ride and use the brakes, the nature is that the pads are going to wear down. It's really hard to quantify in time or miles just how long these pads will last. There's so many factors: riding conditions, weather, and the terrain that you're riding. It can all really affect how long these pads will last. So we really have to get in there and do either a visual inspection or a measurement to see how much pad we have left. So this is a brand new pad, and the backing plate, which is not the pad material, is 2 millimeters thick. The pad material on this, if I measure the whole thing, is measuring at 3.9. So I know that 3.9 minus 2 means we have 1.9 millimeters of pad material. It's a little technical, and the process that I actually use is just with the spring. So this spring here is about 0.5 millimeters thick, half a millimeter. And we know that the pads are going to be worn once they reach around 0.6, 0.7 millimeters. So if I put this spring over the pad, I need to see a little bit of material over the pad. When we see that that material is down at the bottom of that retaining spring, we know that the brakes need to be replaced. Also, some other symptoms that you might see is that your levers are tending to pull a little bit longer than they used to, or if you're getting a little bit of noise or whatnot, it could just be that the pads are worn. There's a lot of factors here, but again, just either doing a visual inspection with the pads in the bike or taking them out is really the best way. The other thing you might notice is that the pads don't necessarily wear completely even, so whether that's the left side versus the right side, or if even one side is at a little bit of angle of wear, we're always going to be looking for where the pad is at its thinnest point. So even if it's just one point in the pad that is worn below that 0.6, 0.7 millimeters, we do need to replace the pads. First thing we'll need to do is drop the wheel, pull this wheel out. Every brake is a little bit different, but there's always going to be some sort of safety clip. So I just have to pull this off before I take the pad retaining bolt out. And the next thing I do is I just remove this pad retaining bolt. So it's generally an Allen key. Some older brakes will use a flathead screwdriver, but this bolt just threads out and I can remove this. And the last step is to just reach in there and grab the brake pads. So these ones come out from the top of the caliper. There are some brakes where they will need to come out from the bottom, but either way they come out relatively easily. So now that we have the brake pads out, I just want to talk about contamination. The brake pad material, which is this silver part here, is porous, and if any oils or waxes or certain cleaners make contact with that pad material, it can absorb the oils and it can become contaminated. So that'll cause lack of power and squeaking depending on how bad the contamination is. And even the oils on our hands, especially if we have grit or grease from other things we've been working on the bike, will contaminate those. So whenever I'm holding the brake pads, I just try my best not to touch that material, and I just hold it by the backing plate, this copper color here. Same thing with the rotors. It's best practice to not touch the rotors. Generally, once the pads become contaminated, there are some theories about cleaning them. Here in the shop, the best practice that we've found is that they never really come back to 100%, so we just tend to replace the pads. With the hydraulic brakes, as the pads wear, the fluid in the system will actually advance the pistons, and that's why you don't need to constantly adjust the brakes as you're wearing through pads like you would on an older cable brake. But what that means is when we pull those pads out, they're much thinner than the new pads. So if we go to put the new pads in, there's not going to be enough room for the pads and the rotor. So we need to go in there and we need to reset the pistons. The pistons are right inside of the caliper. If you look in, you can see them. They're pointing out a bit further than anything else in there. And we just need to use something soft, ideally a tire lever. Depending on the brand of brake, these can be made out of ceramic. And if you try to use something metal, you can actually chip the ceramic piston. But it's quite easy to see. You just go in there with the tire lever, get some good leverage, and you just pry it back, and you should feel it go until it stops, and you'll have to do that on both sides. And you just got to make sure that the pistons are all the way recessed into the caliper, and you should be good to go. This is just isopropyl alcohol or rubbing alcohol, and I like to just spray the caliper down and just make sure everything's nice and clean before I put the new pads in here. Really, the only important step is to make sure that you're using a clean paper towel rather than a rag or something of the like. So we just want to make sure we don't get any grease or oil introduced into the system, and it's as simple as spraying it down and wiping it clean. All right, so now it's time to get the pads back inside of the caliper. The first thing to do is to look at the back of the pad as well as the spring. Some pads will have a left and a right side, and that'll always be as if you were riding the bike. These ones do not, so I don't have to worry about that. So what I'll do is I'll just get this spring and I'll put it over one side of the pad. I'll take the other pad and get it on the spring so that I have them kind of in a nice little sandwiched like this to where I can just put them in the caliper. Again, some will come in from the bottom or from the top. These ones just fit right in from the top, nice and easy. And the holes within the pads just line up with the caliper. And then it's just as simple as getting this retaining bolt back in. I'm going to tighten this down. These are quite small bolts. The torque spec, you can certainly look up for your brake, but just a little bit more than snug tends to do the job. And then the last bit is just taking the clip and getting it back over the end of the bolt. It clips into place. So we got the pads back in the bike. We just put the wheel back in the bike. Everything looks like it's all set, but there's still a few things that we got to talk about before you go out and ride. The first one, and it's very important not to overlook, is that we had reset those pistons and now they need to be recalibrated to this rotor. So the first time that you grab the brake lever, it's not uncommon that it'll go all the way to the handlebar and you won't have any stopping power. So it's very important that in the shop you just press this lever a couple times to get everything back up and running. Now we don't have a soft lever, brake pads look good. If there is rubbing on the pads and the disc, check out one of our other videos. I'm not going to go too in depth into that at this moment. And then lastly, we have to talk about the bed-in procedure. Bedding in a brake is an industry term for breaking in the pads and the rotor. And what needs to happen is the material on the pads needs to bond with the material on the rotor, and it needs to happen through a process called bedding in. So what you're going to do is you're going to go out and you're going to get up to about 10 miles an hour, and you're going to pull your brake until you slow down to about 2 miles an hour. And you're just going to repeat that process. So you're going to feel very little power the first time or two that you use the brake. And then if you do that 5, 6, 7 times, you're going to feel that power come back to normal. The main thing during this process is that it's important not to come to a complete stop. If you come to a complete stop, you can leave an excess of pad material in one spot in the rotor, and that can lead to pulsing or noise or just lack of power overall. So just make sure you bed in the brakes and you should be all set and good to go. I hope you found this useful. Thanks for tuning in. If you did, don't forget to check out some of our other videos, and as always, like and subscribe, and we'll see you later.